Well, welcome to Introduction to Sass. We're just going to introduce the concept of it today, and must confess I don't have some awesome demo to wow you. I am going to demo some code and kind of show you how it works and how I'm using it. This is my implementation of this tool. There's people using it in all sorts of different ways, but today I'm just going to show you the way that I'm implementing it in my projects. Just a little about me. My name is Thomas Lattimore. I'm a freelance front-end developer with a focus on Drupal theming. You would classify me probably as a Drupal snob. I think Drupal is the best content management system, and I just love it because it's open source, and I try and use open source stuff in any project that I can. And I happen to also be a full-time college student along with that. If you want to follow up with me later, I'm known as T. Lattimore, most places, Drupal.org, Twitter, pretty much anywhere online. And if you have any questions, you can hit me up at my contact form at thomaslattimore.com. And let's get started. The assumptions I'm making today in this session is that, first off, you have a basic understanding of what CSS is. If you don't know what CSS is, you'll probably be lost in this session. Just basic stuff, selectors, properties, attributes. I mean, you don't have to be a master, but I don't have time to explain CSS along with this today. And then also, I'm going to be using the command line in my examples today. That isn't required, but if you get a little bit lost, that's okay. And I'm going to explain why it's not required later on in the session. So first off, before we get into how to use Sass, I'm just going to kind of explain why I started using it. And if you work with CSS, at least I have a love-hate relationship with it. I really enjoy working in CSS. I think it's a fun language, pseudo-language, whatever you want to call it, to create style sheets in. But it's very limited. It's hard to extend, meaning that you're locked into whatever browsers have support for, and whatever the W3C will allow within the standard. And I don't know why I'm blinking over there like that. You know why? Oh well. It's not dynamic in any way, meaning that it's not a programming language at all. There's no dynamic functionality, there's no functions, no variables, there's no sense of context at all on a selector, and it's not modular in any way, meaning that it's fairly, not impossible. I mean, you can just copy and paste, apply, 10 attributes and prefix that with 100 selectors that you want it to apply to, but it's really hard to reuse code over and over again. At least I find it. And I'm sure the list goes on. Each one of you in here will probably have your own, gripes about the language. And so a solution that I found that kind of overcomes a lot of these things, a lot of CSS's shortcomings, is Sass. It stands for Syntactically Awesome CSS. Not really a fan of the name, but it's an awesome language, and I really enjoy working in it. And I define Sass as this. Sass is a framework for writing CSS in a more efficient, logical way. Writing CSS, it feels very, it's a simple language, so anyone that has any developer knowledge at all will quickly become frustrated with its limitations. But Sass it feels much more natural, and it makes sense. And from a technical standpoint, it's written in Ruby. So whatever machine you're writing your CSS on with Sass has to be running Ruby. It's a CSS preprocessor, much like Less, if you've heard of Less. Anyone heard of Less in here? I've already gotten a couple questions this morning, like, well, why did you choose Sass over Less? And there's a couple different reasons for that, which I might get into later if we have time. And Sass is very extensible through mixins, and it's even confused with a huge library of mixins called Compass. And if you're in the room and you're using Compass, awesome. But I'm not actually going to get into Compass today just because it opens up a whole new world of stuff. But if you start using Sass, it's good to get into Compass because it's just amazing at what the possibilities are. And Compass is just a framework of mixins that's built on top of Sass. So basically, I mean, Sass is just CSS that doesn't suck, I mean, in my opinion. So first you must have Ruby installed to get it set up. If you're running OS X, I'm told, I'm not a Mac user, but I'm told that it's already set up, ready to go. But if you're not on OS X or it doesn't appear to be there, Google it. I don't have time to walk you through the installation process, unfortunately, today. And to get it installed, we have this awesome Ruby gem installer that's just gem install Sass. And it's done. And if you're on Debian-based or Unix-based machines, sometimes you have to sudo that in order to get the proper permissions, but that's it. And it's installed and you're ready to start using it. And also passing Compass, what I mentioned before, and Haml, which is a HTML templating language that the Sass project actually evolved out of. Instead of Sass on that Compass or gem install, will also get you Sass as well. And so now I've told you how to install it. Now, how do we write it? Sass has two different syntaxes. The first is SCSS, and that's the newer one, and it's pretty much the exact same syntax that is used in standard CSS. Lines are ended with, or not lines, but properties and attribute declarations are ended with a semicolon. Selectors are opened and closed with brackets. And then there's the other syntax, which is known as just Sass. And it doesn't end lines with semicolons at all, doesn't open and close with brackets, and it relies on tabbed indentation to kind of tell what's going on to create the hierarchy within the structure. We're not going to focus on Sass today at all. Most of the documentation online is starting to move towards SCSS, and the good thing about SCSS is if you already know CSS, you don't have to learn any new syntaxes at all whatsoever. You can just jump right in to start writing it, and then as you see fit, start incorporating the features of Sass. So here's how it works. Basically, we have Sass's process running on a machine, executed from the command line is what we're gonna do in my demonstration today. And then you have a Sass file and a CSS file. What the Sass process does is it watches for updates to that Sass file that we're editing. And then when an update's made, it overwrites the existing CSS file with the changes. So what this means is that it overwrites it, and to Drupal or the browser, it's just CSS in the end. In the case that I'm using it, there's a few examples and modules that kind of work with it a little bit differently that I'm going to mention later. But the end result is just CSS like we've worked with. I mean, you can version your Sass file or just version your CSS file. It's pretty much the same on the browser and the Drupal end of things. So the real magic that makes up Sass is this watch command. And to call that, and that watch is just a process that runs, as we mentioned in the previous slide. And to do that, you just pass the watch, and then your input file, .css, or Sass if you use it, and then the name of your output file. And that'll just watch for your changes and then dynamically overwrite your CSS file as the SCSS file is edited. And this command can take several different parameters, including like the output style, some things for like line commenting. So it can even like prefix things that it spits out or overwrites in your CSS file with like where it came from in your Sass file for debugging purposes and stuff like that. And to get a list of all the commands, you can just run sass --. And don't worry, if you're not comfortable with the command line, there is a GUI available for people that like GUIs. If you like a GUI, there is one there. I haven't used it, but there seems to be quite a bit of community effort and energy around it. And you can find that at that URL. And I'll put these slides up on the session page for this later on today, so you can get these links so you don't have to write them down. So the basics, one of the coolest things about it is being able to pass variables. So if you have like font stacks or baseline height or like a color scheme in your site, then you can declare those as variables. And then, I mean, like in my work a lot, sometimes I'll have like a color scheme and I'll, put that in a comment at the top of the CSS file, and then use that throughout the CSS file as kind of like my base color scheme. Well, the downside to that is then if the color scheme changes, then you have to go and change that in every single place in the file. Well, here, if we have a color and it changes down the road in the project, change it in one place, do Sass watch, it'll update the CSS file with all the changes. Makes it a whole lot more efficient. You don't have to go and copy and paste or grep to find every place that it's in your CSS file. You can just declare it there. And like this example would just be output is this. It just passes the variable as a string, so you can put anything you want in there. I mean, if you want to put foobar or whatever, but at the same time, it's also smart in the fact if you put FFF, which is the hex code for white, in your Sass file, then it'll actually output white instead of the hex code. It kind of can recognize when it's a color and what's going on there. One of the really cool things is this nesting ability, and it's one of my favorite parts of writing in the language, is because it creates this visual hierarchy of like what's going on in the style sheet. Also saves characters. I mean, I don't know how many times I've written code similar to this for a menu where you have an unordered list and then list item inside of that, anchor link, and you have to write each one of those out. ULLI, ULLI. If you have something below that like drop downs, you have to do ULLI inside of that, and then UL. It's a mess. And being able to nest like this creates a lot of possibilities. And this would just be output as such. And we can also, for things like font and a few other areas, can't remember all of them, but where you have more than one, namespace appended to font, like family, size, stretch, there's a few other things. You can create nesting with that as well. Mixins is really the power in Sass. It's what I talked about earlier, is creating modular code that's easily reusable. So if you have a style for a block or something that's reused on your site over and over again, you can declare that as a mixin and change it in one place. We're just declaring it up here, all the way here, and it's outputting all that. We want to change attributes of that later, change it up here, and then that's cascaded throughout the rest of the file. And this is actually a newer feature that I haven't used a whole lot. It's called inheritance, and it basically, so if you have a few selectors on a site that have nearly the same style, like this, but maybe you have one place, like one attribute that's a little bit different. So right here, so we're extending the message class because in this case, they have nearly the same attributes, except for the fact that the bold message we want to make font weight of 700, which is bold. So just declare that, and it puts the font weight and just appends the bold class onto the message. Does all the work for you. And this is just the beginning, and there's lots of documentation on sass-lang.com, and some really great examples to get you started. And beyond the basics, really gets into a lot of stuff that Compass is being used for. And Compass is what really is truly a CSS framework. I mean, we call like Blueprint or 960GS a framework, and they're kind of a framework, but they're not really. Like Compass is truly a CSS framework. It can do all sorts of things. Can generate, like, it has built-in mix-ins for like all these cross-browser prefixes that we have to use for CSS3, you know, dash moz, dash border, dash radius, dash webkit, dash border, dash radius, all that. You can pull in a mix-in and just declare, you know, include the mix-in for CSS3 and just, you know, declare border radius, and then it spits out all the needed browser prefixes in your CSS file. It's really nice, saves a lot of headaches and a lot of typing. It's got the Blueprint grid system built in, and they've built that in really smart. Like Blueprint's known for having some really nice typography defaults when it comes to like vertical rhythm and stuff. And you can actually choose what you want to pull in. It's very modular and abstracted. So if you just want to pull in like the typography or just want to pull in like the layout stuff, you can do that with Compass. Has some really nice reset styles. So, I mean, I don't know how many times I've gone out and grabbed Eric Meyer's reset offline and pulled it down, and this, it has it built in, and you just include it as a mix-in in the beginning of your CSS file, and it does the rest of the work for you. And one really cool thing that I haven't had a whole lot of time to mess around with is an image sprite generator. Yeah, so you can like generate an image sprite from like a group of files in a directory if you're familiar with what image sprites are, which is really cool. I'm looking forward to getting into using that more. And also some really nice typography bases. Some nice things to get started with creating vertical rhythm on your site, which is something that I'm bad at. And then you can like declare percentages on your base vertical rhythm and not have to do as much math. And it can do a whole lot more than we can cover in this time frame, which is why I chose not to actually go with it for the presentation. And the majority of people I find using Sass are likely using Compass just because it has so much potential locked up. Now that we've covered all this CSS stuff, how does this actually play into Drupal? Well, there's a couple modules available. One is the Sass/SCSS module, and that's a very simple module if you're looking to get started in it. I haven't used it in production, but I've messed around with it some. And the other is the Compass Style Sheet tool, and that is a bunch of stuff. That seems to have a lot more overhead, but some really nice potential of what it can do. And I'm not using any of these, and that's because I don't think it's Drupal's responsibility to handle the processing of my Sass files. And like, I don't want to have Ruby running out on a server, which the nice thing about the Sass/CSS module is it actually uses a PHP port of Sass to process it all, but then I'm having to process it dynamically if a change is made in it. I'm sure it caches it after that, but I don't want any of that actually running on production. I'm just editing files locally, making the changes, outputting the CSS, and then pushing those changes of the CSS file out to, staging or testing or whatever. There are other related projects that I would encourage you to look up later. One is the Coding Designer Survival Kit, and that is by Mason Window. And there's some really great resources on thecodingdesigner.com to help get you started in Sass. And the Coding Designer Survival Kit is this like group of just a bunch of front-end sweetness. It's got some nice jQuery stuff. It's got like Drupal forms, like the default output of Drupal forms and a lot of other Drupal's markup with it, and some Sass mix-ins like an HTML5 boilerplate. I actually watched a presentation online where he demoed that in DrupalCon Chicago, I think, and that was actually what really inspired me to start moving towards using Sass. And the other one is the Sass Way, and that's like a community blog of people that are using Sass, kind of. And I like it a lot because it kind of explains a lot of the concepts behind Sass. When reading like Sass's website or Compass's website, it reads, I don't mean this in a derogatory sense, but it reads a little like api.drupal.org, where it's just like, you know, samples of code and it does this, and that's great for when I'm trying to code stuff. But the Sass Way kind of explains a lot of the concepts behind Sass and like why you should use SCSS syntax over standard Sass syntax and just stuff like that. If you're looking to kind of, you know, maybe check out the concepts behind it more, that's a great place to go to. Now I'm just going to jump into a demo and kind of show you some stuff. So here I just have a base, ugly, nasty Drupal default output. This is just a Drupal 7 installation out of the box, and that screen's annoying me. And I basically have a directory which I have my CSS files in, and you know, just standard page.tpl. And in my .info file, I'm referencing this directory, just, you know, like you would in any Drupal theme. And if I wanted to start using Sass, just list out the files for you, and that's almost unreadable on there. Well, so let's copy our CSS directory to Sass, to a Sass directory, and all I'm doing here is just copying all the files within CSS over to a directory called Sass. I can't remember the command to group rename files. That's just a move. Can you do a wildcard on that? Let's move. No. So I'm going to rename. So let me back up here before I get too into it. So all I've done here is I have an existing. So if you have an existing Drupal theme that you really want to start using this on, it's possible without having to change a whole bunch of stuff. So if you have a folder with all your CSS files in it, you can just, you know, copy that folder to whatever folder you name you want. I just chose Sass. You could choose SCSS or whatever. And as you can see, oops, I just have two style sheets in there that are the same as they would be in my CSS folder. And what I'm just going to do is I'm just going to change the file name of those is all to get started. Oops. So now I just have a directory of CSS files and a directory of .scss files. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start the Sass watch process. and I'm going to pass in the directory name of where my Sass files lie, and that could be anything, colon, and then the name of my output directory. And hope nothing breaks. And that's completely unreadable. But this here just says overwrite CSS / layout.scss in our two files. So what it did is it saw that there were two files in our Sass directory and then created those two files in the CSS directory. And now, if we open up IDE and refresh, robots do their thing. And I don't know what's going on here. I might have to revert to Vim if this thing doesn't go anywhere, which I don't really want to do. Crap. I don't know why this is taking so long. Shoot. Well, instead of going that route, I'm just going to open up another terminal and go with Vim. And it looks like my VM crashed something. Might have been because of me moving in here, network changes or something. I don't know. It's just being very slow for some reason. All right. All right, so now we're CD'd into our directory where our Sass files lie. And whoopee, it opened up here. All right, now we get started. So let's just open up our style.css or SCSS. And as you'll notice, I don't have anything in this directory yet except this group of colors. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to create some variables out of these so I don't have to repeat them in every place I have to declare them as. And I also declare my color names along with that, and I didn't mean to do that. Oh, darn. So let's just declare this as some color. And I'm just going to delete these. So if we wanted to reference that variable, let's just call the body tag and not call it, but select the body tag, and let's say we just want a background color of $, some color, which happens to be our variable name in this case. And if you go over to here, and error syntax, crap. There we go. And as you'll see, you can watch the process, and it recognized our changes. It also did an error check to make sure that the CSS was, formatted properly. And it actually checked to see. I didn't realize it did that actually, but it checked to see that we were referencing a color on that background. Saw that it was too many characters and didn't overwrite the CSS file. It just failed because of an error. We changed that, and then it overwrote our style.css. And we go, open up. I don't even know what color this is, so I don't know what it'll look like. And it's this horrid, nasty green. Let's say if we wanted to change that to, I don't know, let's just do black. Go, you can see it ran another override on the style.css. Go here, and it overwrote it. And now we can't read anything because of our background color we chose. I'm actually going to try this color. And that's not much better, but oh well. So that's the basics of using variables. It allows you to reuse, strings of text that you have to repeat over and over again in a CSS file, edit it in one place, and cascades throughout the document when you compile it again. And then let me show you a mix-in real quick. Mix-in. I think that's the right syntax. Actually, a mix-in is a chunk of reusable code. Well, an include file is, if you're talking in PHP terms, an include file, or in CSS. Yeah. So it allows you to reference a little bit of. So if you've ever used PHP includes to pull in a menu or something like that. Yeah, and then we just would down here do include on this thing to mix something in. Let's just call this button and hope that I don't forget any syntax stuff here. And a cool thing about mix-ins is you can actually pass in arguments as variables into it. So say if we wanted to do a rounded border, something like that, and we wanted to set the default of that argument as 5 pixels, and let's just leave that one at that. Thank you for that. And now we just include button, and we aren't going to pass any arguments to that. I hope it's include. I always forget. Background expected to class element was, oh, I deleted that variable maybe. Oh well. There we go. So it included our mix-in. If we want to go look out our style.css, it passed all the information from this mix-in here, and we called it down here. So say, I wouldn't want to declare button on the body, but say if you have like a style for a reusable media element or a button on a site that has, standard borders, border radius, background color, but you don't want to hard code that, you can do a mix-in and then pass in arguments for the font size and the border radius, and then each place you use that, you just pass in an argument. So I could, let's put this on anchor links. Say if I wanted to, no, let's just try that. I have no clue what this is going to look like. But there you go. Ooh, and it overwrote admin too. I didn't think about that. But there are mix-ins just being, used and included. And I mean, there's the basics of it. There's lots of documentation online. Is there anyone that has any questions? Anyone here using less at all? Less CSS? Why did you choose it over it? I'd like everyone else to.
Oh, I'm a back-end developer. I create a person driven.
Oh, okay.
But, when I make updates, do it afterwards.
And are you running Node.js to compile that?
No, there's a Mac GUI for it.
Okay. Yeah, GUI guys.
Well, I'm a big Node.js man.
Yeah. I like Node.js too, but I don't really want to run it on the server just to compile my. Then again, you could look at that same way about Ruby, but there is I guess it's because there's other stuff I use with Ruby. That was kind of why I leaned towards it. But less is another one that you'll see around a lot. Yes.
How does it affect or is affected by the normal CSS inheritance?
You mean like if we wanted to inherit properties like this, you're saying, or like in the cascade of things? It doesn't affect anything, really. I mean, unless you are overwriting stuff. It just cascades like anything else. It even cascades variables. So if you alter a variable later on in the style sheet, like if you, if you have a mix-ins, also if you declare a variable inside a mix-in, that's a local variable, if you understand the difference between global and local variables. So you can alter a variable inside a mix-in and it won't affect the rest of the style sheet, which is pretty nice. Man, that screen annoys me. Any other questions at all?
Does it do any auto optimization?
What?
Things like, does it do any auto optimization? So if you define the color as 6 zeros instead of 3 zeros, will it those?
It actually, if you declare 3 zeros, it'll output it as 6. Yeah, it does it the other way around.
I think it does have something built in where it can automatically minify your CSS.
Yeah.
It's probably
So here's all the list of the parameters that we can pass in. For the style, there's all sorts of different styles. The default is nested, and compact is the one that we just mentioned, where it compresses all the CSS together. But there's also, or not, I can't remember if it's compact or compressed. I actually use expanded on most of my stuff because it's almost like the unofficial, the documentation that's on Drupal.org to write CSS, even though it isn't actually official, whatever that means. But what's documented on Drupal.org as the standard for which contrib themes and stuff are supposed to output their CSS, expanded is fairly close to it in the way that it formats things. Any other questions?
Do you have to set that watch every time you run SSH?
Yes. That is a process that is left running while you're writing CSS. And that's one thing that really confused me and really the only downside that I don't like in it. But at the same time, that's a good thing because then you don't have an extra process running on your computer otherwise it'd have to be running in the background all the time unless you started and stopped it. But yes?
A lot of stuff I feel during the day are going to be little sites. And change a z-index on something,
Yeah.
and you were telling me you don't run Sass on a production site.
No.
So on a production site, it's a small site, so it's not huge visibility. What do you do? You just go and change a style sheet, you know to yourself, go back to the Sass repo.
Well, and that depends on the workflow that you have. I mean, for even stuff that I have on my own, I generally always have a local copy of it that I can, I try and manage everything in Git, and for my own stuff, my own small projects, I don't have a full dev staging production workflow, but I always have everything managed in Git locally and out in a remote Git repository. I wouldn't, as policy, I guess, ever edit the CSS files. The reason for that is because, if you saw the command running, it overwrites the style. So if you forget to pull that change back into Sass, which for something that's small like that, it'd be easy to remember, but as policy, I wouldn't do that. I'd always run Sass. But if it is a small site, and this is just the way that I'm using it, you can look up the modules and see if they work for your use case. And there's some pretty large sites and some really good, or people that I respect in the Drupal community that are using those. It's just not the route that I've chosen to go. And that puts a lot of it on Drupal's, in Drupal's hands to actually compile the Sass files. And then you are compiling it in production, and you could make a change like that. So.
Second question.
Yes.
Is there a lint-like process when it goes through?
It does syntax checking. So if like there's all these errors, like here it checked to see if the color I was trying to declare for backgrounds is too many characters, or like if it was if it was an odd number of characters, because you can declare an even number and then it'll just repeat. But if it was an odd number, it would probably throw an error for that as well. And then you can see it. I had a parenthesis after my back declaration for backgrounds also, and it threw an error. But the error checking is pretty smart from what I've found thus far, in that it doesn't actually check for, it doesn't check it against the W3C standard. It has its own, basically if it wouldn't break your CSS file, it doesn't throw an error for it. So you can declare some unknown property and attribute like foo with a property of bar, and it wouldn't throw an error for that. And that's part of the fact that it's forward thinking, in even though the property doesn't exist now, it may exist later. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Okay.
One last question.
Yes.
Is there a Vim syntax plugin for CSS?
Vim syntax plugin. Not that I've heard about, but I wouldn't be surprised if someone wrote one. There is, if anyone uses TextMate, which I use program a lot, called Sublime, which uses TextMate plugins or whatever to do its stuff. There is a TextMate, I forget what they're called, that does all the, it'll use syntax highlighting like CSS on .scss files, and can kind of handle it a little bit better. Any more questions as we're closing up?
Is Sass agnostic to what version of CSS, 2 versus 3? That's peculiarities.
I don't know that it would really be. I would say that it probably leans more towards CSS 3, but all that stuff hasn't actually been standardized. Even though we're using it, we're using it on production sites. I use CSS 3 all the time, and then have IE fallbacks regularly in my work. It's not standardized yet. So, if you use one or the other, I haven't encountered any places where it might, have any discrepancies. All right, well, time's up. So thank you very much for That's any.